In the vast tapestry of Egyptian mythology, there exists a story so profound, so deeply moving, that it has echoed through millennia and influenced countless cultures across the world. It is a tale of a perfect king who brought civilization to humanity, only to be betrayed by his own brother in the most heinous act of treachery the divine world had ever witnessed. It is a story of murder, love, resurrection, and ultimately, eternal justice. This is the story of Osiris, the god who died so that humanity could live forever. Before Osiris walked the earth, Egypt was a land of chaos and barbarism. Humans lived like animals, knowing nothing of agriculture, law, or civilization. They wandered the deserts and marshes, eating whatever they could scavenge, living in fear and ignorance. The world needed a teacher, a leader, someone who could lift humanity from the darkness of savagery into the light of civilization. That someone was Osiris, and his arrival would change everything. Osiris was born as one of the children of Geb, the earth god, and Nut, the sky goddess. The story of his birth itself is remarkable. The sun god Ra had decreed that Nut could not give birth on any day of any month, for he had learned through prophecy that her children would threaten his supreme rule. But Thoth, the clever god of wisdom, gambled with the moon and won enough moonlight to create 5 extra days that belonged to no month. These became known as the epigomenal days, and on these days, Nut gave birth to 5 divine children. Osiris was born on the first day, and at the moment of his birth a voice rang out across the cosmos, declaring that the Lord of all creation had come into the world. From his very first breath, Osiris was different from the other gods. While many deities represented forces of nature or abstract concepts, Osiris represented something humanity desperately needed: order, justice, and benevolent leadership. He was depicted as a man with green or black skin, colors that symbolized the fertile black soil of the Nile Valley and the promise of rebirth and vegetation. He wore the Atef crown, a tall white crown flanked by ostrich feathers, and he carried the crook and flail, symbols of kingship and authority that every pharaoh after him would hold. When Osiris came to Egypt to rule as its first divine king, he found the people living in a state of complete primitiveness. They practiced cannibalism, had no concept of agriculture or settled life, and possessed no laws or moral codes. But Osiris was patient and kind. He did not rule through fear or violence like many gods might have. Instead, he taught through example and gentle persuasion. First, Osiris taught humanity the art of agriculture. He showed them how to plant seeds, how to cultivate wheat and barley, how to harvest grain and make bread. This was perhaps his greatest gift, for it meant that humans no longer had to wander constantly in search of food. They could settle in one place, build homes, create communities. The Nile Valley, which flooded predictably each year, became the breadbasket of the ancient world under Osiris's guidance. But Osiris did not stop at agriculture. He gave humanity the gift of law and justice, establishing the concept of Ma'at, the cosmic order and balance that would become the foundation of Egyptian civilization. He taught them religion, showing them how to honor the gods properly. He introduced music and the arts, enriching their lives beyond mere survival. He even taught them about brewing beer and making wine, understanding that humans needed not just sustenance, but also joy and celebration in their lives. Under Osiris's rule, Egypt transformed into a paradise on earth. The land flourished, the people prospered, and harmony reigned everywhere the god-king's influence reached. His wife Isis, the most powerful goddess of magic and wisdom, ruled alongside him with equal grace and wisdom. She was not just his consort but his partner in every sense, and together they embodied the perfect balance of masculine and feminine divine power. The people loved them both with a devotion that bordered on worship, which was appropriate, for they were indeed gods walking among mortals. But in every paradise there lurks the potential for tragedy, and in Egypt's golden age, that potential took the form of Set, Osiris's own brother. Set was the god of chaos, storms, violence, and the barren desert. Where Osiris represented the fertile black land, Set represented the red land, the harsh and unforgiving desert that surrounded the Nile Valley. Where Osiris was beloved, Set was feared. Where Osiris brought order, Set brought disruption. The ancient texts tell us that Set's skin was red like the desert sands, and his nature was as harsh and unpredictable as the storms he commanded. He was not evil in the way we might understand evil today. In Egyptian thought, Set had his place in the cosmic order. He was the god who rode in Ra's solar boat each night, using his tremendous strength to fight off Apophis, the serpent of chaos who sought to devour the sun. Set's violence and ferocity were necessary for protecting the cosmos from total annihilation. But Set's heart was poisoned by jealousy. He watched his brother receive all the love and admiration that he himself craved. He saw how the people celebrated Osiris, while they made protective gestures against Set's name. He witnessed the prosperity of the Black Land, while his red desert remained barren and lifeless. The resentment grew in his heart like a cancer, festering and spreading until it consumed every other emotion. Set decided that if he could not be loved like his brother, then he would take what his brother had. He would seize the throne of Egypt for himself. Set was cunning as well as violent. He knew he could not simply challenge Osiris openly, for his brother was beloved by all the gods and protected by Isis's powerful magic. So Set plotted in secret, gathering 72 conspirators who shared his jealousy or who he had manipulated into supporting his cause. He devised a plan so treacherous, so carefully calculated, that it would become the archetype for betrayal in Egyptian culture for thousands of years. Set commissioned a magnificent chest, a sarcophagus of extraordinary beauty. It was made of precious wood and decorated with gold, gems, and intricate carvings. But this chest had a secret. Set had taken Osiris's measurements while his brother slept, and the chest was built to fit Osiris and only Osiris perfectly. Then Set announced a great feast, a celebration supposedly in honor of his brother's successful reign. Osiris, trusting and unsuspecting, attended with joy. During the height of the celebration, when wine flowed freely and laughter filled the hall, Set unveiled his beautiful chest. He announced a game, declaring that whoever could fit inside the chest perfectly would receive it as a gift. The guests, intrigued by this magnificent prize, began trying one by one. Some were too tall, others too short, some too wide, others too thin. None fit perfectly. The guests laughed and joked about their failed attempts. Then Osiris, encouraged by the cheerful atmosphere and perhaps made less cautious by wine, decided to try. The moment he lay down inside the chest, he fit perfectly, as Set had known he would. But before Osiris could rise or react, Set's conspirators rushed forward and slammed the lid shut. They nailed it closed, then poured molten lead over every seam, sealing Osiris inside an airtight tomb. The god-king, trapped and suffocating, could do nothing as his own brother condemned him to death. Set and his conspirators carried the chest to the Nile and threw it into the river. The current caught it and carried it away, out to the Mediterranean Sea, where it disappeared into the vast waters. Set then declared himself the new king of Egypt, ruling through fear and violence rather than love and wisdom. The Golden Age was over. Darkness had fallen upon the land. But Set had not accounted for the determination and love of Isis. When the goddess discovered what had happened to her husband, her grief shook the heavens. Her wails of anguish could be heard across all of Egypt, and even the stones themselves were said to weep at her sorrow. But Isis did not surrender to despair. She transformed her grief into determination. She would find her husband's body, no matter how long it took, no matter how far she had to travel. Isis cut her hair in mourning, tore her robes, and set out on a quest that would take her across the known world. She traveled the length of Egypt, asking every person she met if they had seen the chest. She questioned fishermen and farmers, priests and merchants. She spoke to the reeds along the riverbank and the birds in the sky. Slowly, piece by piece, she gathered information about the chest's journey. The chest had floated down the Nile to the sea, then been carried by currents to the distant land of Byblos in Phoenicia. There, it had washed ashore and lodged against a small tamarisk tree. Something magical happened then. Perhaps it was the divine essence of Osiris within the chest, or perhaps it was the god's will. But the tree began to grow at an incredible rate. It grew around the chest, encasing it completely within its trunk, until it became the most magnificent tree anyone in Byblos had ever seen. The king of Byblos, amazed by this enormous and beautiful tree, ordered it cut down. He had it fashioned into a pillar for his palace, unknowingly making the tomb of a god into an architectural support for his throne room. The chest, with Osiris's body still sealed inside, became part of the palace structure. When Isis finally traced her husband to Byblos, she had to use all her cunning to retrieve him. She disguised herself as an old woman and sat by the seashore weeping. The handmaidens of the queen found her there, and moved by compassion, brought her to the palace. Isis, still disguised, became the nursemaid to the queen's infant son. Each night, she would place the baby in magical flames that would have granted him immortality, while she herself transformed into a swallow and flew around the pillar that contained Osiris, mourning in a bird's sorrowful song. One night, the queen discovered Isis placing her child in the flames and screamed in horror, breaking the spell that would have made the prince immortal. Isis revealed her true form then, and her divine glory filled the palace with such radiant light that all who saw her fell to their knees. She explained why she had come, and the king and queen, awed and terrified, immediately gave her the pillar. Isis cut it open, retrieved the chest containing her beloved husband, and began the sorrowful journey back to Egypt. But the story does not end with this reunion, for Osiris was still dead, and Isis's trials were far from over. When she returned to Egypt, she hid the chest in the marshes of the Nile Delta, while she gathered the magical components she would need to attempt a resurrection. She should have known that nothing could be hidden from Seth forever. The usurper king, hunting in the marshes one night under the full moon, discovered the chest. His rage was terrible to behold. He had killed his brother once, but Osiris's body still existed, still held the potential for return. Seth would not make the same mistake twice. He tore open the chest, pulled out Osiris's body, and in a frenzy of hatred and fear, he dismembered it. He tore the body into 14 pieces and scattered them across the entire length and breadth of Egypt, from the delta to the southern cataracts, ensuring that Osiris could never be whole again. When Isis returned and found the empty, shattered chest, her anguish was beyond description. But once again, she transformed grief into determination. She enlisted the help of her sister Nephthys, Set's own wife, who had been horrified by her husband's actions. Together, the two goddesses began searching every corner of Egypt for the scattered pieces of Osiris. It was a quest that would become legendary. Isis and Nephthys traveled the entire country, asking questions, following rumors, searching marshes and deserts, cities and wildernesses. Wherever they found a piece of Osiris, they performed sacred rituals and buried it with honor. This is why in later Egyptian history, so many cities claimed to be the burial place of Osiris. Each location marked where Isis had found and honored one piece of her husband's dismembered body. The goddesses found 13 pieces, but the 14th, Osiris's phallus, had been thrown into the Nile where it was eaten by an oxyrhynchus fish. This is why this particular fish became sacred in Egyptian religion, and also why it was forbidden to eat it in certain regions. Isis, using her tremendous magical powers, fashioned a replacement from gold and precious materials. Then came the most sacred and mysterious part of the myth. Isis reassembled Osiris's body, binding the pieces together with linen wrappings, creating the first mummy in Egyptian history. She performed magical rituals passed down from the most ancient times, rituals so powerful and sacred that they would become the foundation of all Egyptian funerary practices. She called upon all the gods, upon the powers of earth and sky, upon the ancient magic that had existed since before creation. And incredibly, impossibly, Osiris began to breathe again. His heart began to beat. His eyes opened. The god who had been murdered, dismembered and scattered across Egypt had been brought back to life through the power of love and magic. Isis transformed herself into a kite, a bird of prey, and hovered over her husband's restored body. In this moment of resurrection, in this triumph over death itself, she conceived a child. That child would be Horus, the avenger, the heir, the one who would eventually reclaim his father's throne from Set. But Osiris could not remain in the world of the living. He had crossed the boundary between life and death, and though love had brought him back, He belonged now to the realm of the dead. So Osiris descended into the Duat, the Egyptian underworld, not as a victim, but as a ruler. He became the Lord of the Dead, the judge who would weigh the hearts of deceased souls against the feather of Maat to determine their fate in the afterlife. This transformation, from murdered king to lord of the afterlife, gave Osiris perhaps his most important role in Egyptian religion. He became the god who promised resurrection and eternal life to all who followed the path of righteousness. Just as Osiris had died and been reborn, so too could every Egyptian hope to die and be reborn in the afterlife. The elaborate mummification rituals, the Book of the Dead, the massive investment in tombs and grave goods, all of this stemmed from the promise that Osiris represented, that death was not the end but merely a transformation. In the Hall of Two Truths, Osiris sat upon his throne, wrapped in white mummy bandages, his green skin symbolizing rebirth, wearing his Atef crown and holding his crook and flail. Before him, the deceased would have their hearts weighed on a scale against the feather of Maat by Anubis, while Thoth recorded the results. If the heart was lighter than the feather, balanced by a life of truth and justice, Osiris would grant the deceased entry into the field of reeds, a paradise where they could live eternally in peace and plenty. But if the heart was heavy with sin and wrongdoing, it would be devoured by Amit, the demoness who was part crocodile, part lion, and part hippopotamus. That soul would cease to exist entirely, suffering the second death from which there was no return. Osiris, the god who had suffered the ultimate injustice, became the ultimate judge of justice. The king who had taught humanity law and morality became the enforcer of cosmic moral order in the afterlife. The cult of Osiris became one of the most important in all of Egyptian religion. His primary cult center was Abydos, which became the most sacred pilgrimage site in Egypt. Every Egyptian hoped to make a journey to Abydos at least once in their lifetime, and if they could not, they at least wanted their name or a memorial stela placed there. The city was believed to be the location of Osiris's tomb, and annual festivals reenacted his death and resurrection with massive pageantry and deep emotional devotion. The mysteries of Osiris, secret religious dramas that portrayed his death and resurrection, were performed annually. These were not mere plays but sacred rituals that participants believed helped maintain the cosmic order and ensure the continued resurrection of the dead. The passion of Osiris, his suffering, death, and triumph over mortality, became the central narrative of Egyptian hopes for the afterlife. Osiris represented something profound in the Egyptian psyche: the good king, the just ruler, the benevolent father who loves his people. He was the promise that justice would ultimately prevail, that goodness would triumph over evil, that death itself could be overcome through righteousness and proper ritual. Every pharaoh, while alive, was considered the embodiment of Horus, Osiris's son. But when that pharaoh died, he became Osiris, joining the god in ruling the afterlife. The story of Osiris influenced countless other cultures and religions. Scholars have noted similarities between Osiris's death and resurrection, and similar themes in other Mediterranean religions, including early Christianity. The image of the dying and rising god, the divine king who sacrifices himself for his people and promises them eternal life, resonated across cultures and centuries. Even today, thousands of years after the last temple to Osiris closed its doors, the green-skinned god continues to capture our imagination. He appears in popular culture, in movies and books and games. More importantly, the questions his myth raises remain relevant. What does it mean to be a good ruler? How do we face mortality? Can love truly conquer death? What makes a life worth living, and what determines our worth after death? Osiris, the god who brought civilization to humanity, who was betrayed and murdered, who was resurrected through love, and who became the eternal judge of souls, stands as one of the most complex and meaningful deities ever conceived by human imagination. His story is ultimately one of hope. Hope that goodness matters, that justice prevails, that love is more powerful than death, and that our existence continues beyond the grave. In the green-skinned god, wrapped in burial bandages, sitting in judgment in the Hall of Two Truths, the ancient Egyptians found comfort, purpose, and the promise of eternity.